Welcome back. Well, the Helen Suzman Foundation says it's making a series of proposals to try and improve the way the Judicial Service Commission selects and disciplines judges. It's proposing that the JSC become more transparent and have a clear set of criteria by which it will decide who would be nominated to be a judge and who would not. It also suggests, this may be the controversial part of it, that the number of politicians and the number of people appointed by the President to the JSC should be reduced. Chelsea Ramsden is a senior legal researcher at the Helen Suzman Foundation. Chelsea, good afternoon to you. Firstly, the number of people appointed by politicians. So political parties make appointments to the JSC. The President appoints 4 people to the JSC. Why do you want that number reduced?
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. First off, the number of politicians on the benches doesn't meet the international standards of how it is suggested model laws that commissions should be put together. In a lot of other places, and in terms of international law, there is a requirement more that judges, scholars, legal academics, from the profession, they're the ones that form part of this, as they sit on the commissions. They understand what is required of judges, what the values that need to look for are in them. But we understand in South Africa that given our past and that and everything, we should at least have some politicians on. We're not advocating for no politicians on it. We think our situation is unique. We would just like a better balance of the politicians that are on them, that do sit on the commission. And this in itself won't fix everything, having a lesser number, but it will, if read with Proposal 2, which requires accountability mechanisms for the commissioners on the JSC, read together with those 2 proposals are implemented, we believe it will go a long way in ensuring that the proceedings of the JSC and their conduct going forward is up to standard.
In a way, the problem of appointing judges often comes down to the same thing. No one wants politicians to pick judges. No one wants judges to pick judges necessarily either, because you would just replicate the model that you have now. So let's just, for argument's sake, call it the judicial experts, which would include judges, lawyers, academics on the one side and politicians on the other. The argument to include politicians would be that voters must be represented. Surely that's true, and voters should be represented, and shouldn't they be represented in quite a high number?
As I said, we do agree that there should be numbers of politicians on the commission. However, I don't necessarily think that there needs to be a higher number of politicians. If we look at the proceedings to remove a judge and the disciplinary proceedings, there is ways for the politicians to get involved in that matter. Unfortunately, well, we'll see how the next elections go, but as the way goes, it's very one-sided, heavy political representatives. And if we looked at the State Capture Commission and what came out there from the deployment committee, there seems to be that the commissioners are going forward with the will of the party, and whether the will of the party is the will of the people is also something that needs to be considered.
I suppose there are 2 sets of political appointments to the JSC. You've got the politicians who represent political parties, and then you've got the 4 appointments by the President. Now, you could argue that the President then gets 2 bites at the cherry, because the President gets to appoint 4 people to the JSC and then also gets to actually make the final decision based on the people nominated by the JSC. So would the simplest thing be to just remove the President's 4 picks?
Not necessarily. We would advocate that there could be lesser amounts of that he would choose. But if we look at the people that President Cyril Ramaphosa has put on the JSC now, they have added great to the last interviews and that. So it's not necessarily to say that there will always be political members, but there's also the minister who automatically gets a seat on the board. And we just submit that a fairer balance representing all interests of society would be the right way.
You also want clearer criteria for judges. This gets to quite a complex thing, as I understand it. There are supposed to be criteria. I think some of them might well be set out in the Constitution. What are you asking for from the JSC here?
Well, the JSC previously, we only had the requirements in the Constitution, and then they had a 2010 supplementary criteria, which was very vague, and quite honestly, you weren't certain if they were ever applying it in their interviews. None of the questions seemed to go towards that criteria. They have, however, released criteria for public comments. The comments was due yesterday. These comments go a long way in improving the question, well, should go a long way in improving the questions that commissioners ask. It gives them a little bit of a bounce in terms of they can't just spring these accusations on commissioners and on the candidates anymore without previously talking to them. However, criteria in itself, although vitally important, will mean nothing if they don't apply it. And as I said previously, even with their supplementary criteria, they weren't applying it then. So it's going to come down to whether they actually stick to and adhere to this criteria.
In a way, for any change to happen with the Judicial Service Commission is going to require a change to the law, possibly a change to the Constitution. You're going to have to get the politicians to agree to that, Chelsea. I don't see that happening.
We do think this will be a difficult task going forward. However, if we've just seen at the changes that have been made since Chief Justice Zondo has come in, the criteria has been released. There is a little more transparency by publishing a few more things on the judiciary's website. Our report, however, calls for its own website. So some of these things can be changed without changing any of the laws. And it also just requires a lot their own practice, their codes. These things can be implemented without having to make many legislative changes.
Chelsea Ramsden, thank you. Senior Legal Researcher at the Helen Suzman Foundation. Do appreciate the time.